The room was filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and the hum of casual conversation. But there was something wrong, something unseen, something that settled thick in the air, making the walls close in. Before we continue the story, comment what city you're watching us from. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications if you enjoy stories like this. Sarah Johnson wheeled through the restaurant doors, her eyes scanning the cozy interior. Nothing out of the ordinary. She wasn't looking for trouble, but trouble had a way of finding her. She had no idea that this night would mark a turning point in her life, a moment so dark, so unjust, that it would forever alter the way she saw the world. Born and raised in Chicago, Sarah was more than just a survivor. She was a warrior. Her wheelchair didn't define her. Her past didn't define her. She had faith, she had strength, and she carried herself with the dignity of someone who had faced the harshest battles and walked away stronger. But tonight, in this quiet, upscale restaurant, all of that would be tested. Her faith, her resolve, and even the very idea of human decency would be called into question. As she wheeled herself toward a table, she couldn't help but feel the stares, cold, scrutinizing gazes that seemed to strip away her humanity, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. The hostess at the front greeted her with a forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice dripping with something Sarah couldn't quite place. "We don't have any available seating for you right now." It wasn't the words. It was the way she said it, the undertone that hinted at something more, something unspoken. Sarah felt the knot form in her stomach, but she held her ground. She wasn't going anywhere. Not now. Not ever. The room seemed to pause for a moment, as if everyone held their breath, waiting. But Sarah, ever composed, refused to let them see her flinch. She didn't beg. She didn't argue. She simply stared back, her eyes locked on the hostess's, daring her to say the next words. But they weren't just words that would follow. No. Behind that moment, something much darker was unfolding, something that Sarah had no idea was being orchestrated in the background. And she couldn't know, because no one, not even the kindest of souls, could ever expect what was about to come next. As she sat there, steeling herself against the rising tide of injustice, unaware of the unseen eyes in the shadows, she was about to face one of the cruelest tests of her life. What Sarah didn't know was that the clock was ticking. There were forces at play that had no interest in fairness, no interest in kindness. And in this battle, she would have to rely on more than just her strength. But who was watching? Who saw it all, waiting for the right moment to intervene? The camera never lies. This was only the beginning as we dive into the story. If you believe everyone should be treated with respect, no matter what their color and condition is, click the subscribe button and tell us where you're watching from. Sarah Johnson had known struggle all her life. Raised in the heart of Chicago, she learned early on that the world could be unforgiving. A devout Christian, Sarah's faith had always been her compass. Her unwavering belief that through Jesus Christ, all things were possible, that even in the most desperate of times, there was hope. Her life had never been easy, but she had never faltered. She had raised her children on that same foundation of love and faith. Through the hardships of poverty, the weight of systemic discrimination, and the bitter sting of rejection, Sarah never wavered in her role as a mother. Her son, Jordan, grew up watching her, seeing the way she would take every blow with grace, never letting it define her or steal her joy. But there was so much he didn't know. He didn't know how many times his mother had been ignored, treated as invisible, simply because of the color of her skin. He didn't know the weight of those moments when the world seemed to turn a blind eye to her humanity. He didn't know how many times she had been forced to smile through the pain, to keep her head high, to protect him from the ugliness that came with living in a world that too often didn't value her. And then there was the accident. It had been a normal day like any other. But the crash had left Sarah with broken bones, shattered dreams, and a body that could no longer move the way it once had. The wheelchair became a part of her life, an uninvited companion, but not one she would let control her. No, The wheelchair didn't define her. She refused to let it. Sarah's faith was the thing that kept her moving, that kept her breathing. When so many people would have given up, when so many others would have questioned why something so cruel had happened to them, Sarah had clung to one simple truth: God has a plan. She would tell herself this every morning as she wheeled herself out of bed, every time she faced the world, no matter how hard it seemed. And every day, she would move forward. She had to, for her children, for her community, for herself. But this night was different. She had no idea that the restaurant she had walked into, the one that had rejected her before she could even sit down, held a connection to her, one she was completely unaware of. Her son, Jordan, had worked tirelessly for years, building his business from the ground up. He had faced his own battles, carving out his place in a world that often underestimated him. And in doing so, he had built something beautiful. A restaurant that had become a cornerstone in the community. A place where everyone was welcome, no matter their background, no matter their skin. A place that prided itself on acceptance, on love, on hospitality. But that night, Jordan wasn't in the kitchen. He wasn't behind the counter. He was sitting in the back, away from the front lines of the business, when he got a call from his manager, a call that would shake him to his core. "They won't let her in," the manager said, voice tight with disbelief. "Sarah Johnson. She's here, at the front, and they won't seat her." Jordan didn't understand. Sarah Johnson? The name lingered on his mind for a moment, and then the weight of it hit him. He knew that name. He knew her. She is his mother. She had been a constant in their lives, a woman who had taught him what true strength looked like, even before he could comprehend it. And now, he was hearing about her being turned away. He could feel the anger rising inside him, but also something else, something deeper, a sense of helplessness. How could this be happening? How could his restaurant, the place he had worked so hard to build, be complicit in such cruelty? The stakes were high now. The pain was no longer just Sarah's to bear. It was his, too. As he sat in the back of the restaurant, unaware that his own flesh and blood was the one being humiliated, he realized that something had to change. But how? The system that had allowed this injustice to happen was bigger than him, bigger than Sarah. And in the blink of an eye, it had set the stage for a confrontation that no one had prepared for. Sarah, sitting at the table, still unaware of who was behind the restaurant's walls, would soon face a decision. Would she rise above the hurt, the shame, the degradation that was being thrust upon her? Or would this night become the breaking point, the moment when everything she had worked for, everything she had believed in, came crashing down? And Jordan? He was about to find out just how far he was willing to go to protect the people he loved, the very people who had given him everything, even when life seemed to offer nothing in return. But one thing was certain: this was no longer just about a meal. This was no longer just about racism or a wheelchair or a night gone wrong. This was about something far greater, something that could only be understood in the context of a long, painful history. A history that Sarah and Jordan were about to confront together in a way neither of them had ever imagined. What happens next would challenge everything they knew about family, justice, and the power of faith. And for Sarah, it would be the test of a lifetime. Sarah Johnson's life had never been about living in the spotlight. It wasn't about grandeur, fame, or recognition. No, her life was about purpose. It was about living each day with intention, carrying the weight of her struggles with quiet strength, and inspiring the people around her, especially her children, Jordan and Alicia. Each Sunday, she could be found at the small, brick church on the corner of 5th and Grove, her wheelchair pushed by someone from the congregation, but her heart carried by something much stronger than her body. Church wasn't just a place to sit. It was the foundation of everything she believed. It was the space where her faith was constantly renewed, where she was reminded that God's grace was bigger than any challenge the world could throw at her. Her church family knew her well. They admired her not just for her faith, but for the way she had raised her children, the way she had lived her life with resilience. Sarah never let her disability become an obstacle. She never let the harshness of the world steal her joy. And the same went for her identity as a black woman in America, a woman who had seen the worst that people could offer, yet still chose to rise above it. Her role at the Hope Community Center was another extension of who she was. Every week, she volunteered, offering her time and her wisdom to those in need. The center was a sanctuary for troubled youth, for the elderly, for anyone who needed support. Sarah was more than just a volunteer. She was a mentor, a listener, a shoulder to lean on. She had seen children come in broken, lost in the world, and she had watched them leave with hope in their eyes, the kind of hope that could only come from a life rooted in something greater than their circumstances. And her children, Jordan and Alicia, were the center of it all. Sarah had raised them to understand the importance of kindness, the value of hard work, and, above all, the power of belief. Jordan, ever the protector, had grown up with a heart as big as his mother's. He admired her, but he also felt the weight of the world pressing down on her, and it fueled his desire to change things for the better. Alicia, her youngest, was the firecracker, full of energy, full of passion, always asking questions, always seeking to understand the world around her. Together, they formed a family that was bound not just by blood, but by a shared sense of purpose. Every day, Sarah went about her routine with a quiet determination. She didn't complain about her disability. She didn't dwell on the challenges of being a black woman in a society that too often overlooked or dismissed her. Instead, she found joy in the simple things, the sound of her children laughing, the warmth of the sun on her face during a walk in the park, the deep sense of fulfillment she got from helping others. But as the weeks passed, Sarah could feel the weight of the world shifting. There was a tension in the air, something she couldn't quite name, but she knew it was there. And though she wasn't the type to focus on things she couldn't control, there was something different about this feeling. It was as if the peace she had fought so hard to build was being challenged in ways she couldn't yet understand. Then came the day when Jordan invited her to Maggie's Bistro, the high-end restaurant he had worked so tirelessly to make a success. Maggie's was the epitome of elegance, modern, sleek, with warm lighting that gave the entire space a soft, inviting glow. It was a far cry from the community center or the modest home Sarah was used to, but she was proud of her son, proud of what he had accomplished, proud of the man he had become. The restaurant itself was a reflection of Jordan's vision, a place where people could come together, regardless of race or background, to share a meal and experience something more than just food. It was a place where people were meant to feel welcome, valued, seen. Every detail, from the hand-painted murals on the walls to the carefully curated menu, was a testament to Jordan's commitment to building something beautiful. A place where anyone, regardless of who they were, could feel at home. Sarah had seen her son grow up with a deep sense of justice, always fighting for what was right. He had never been one to back down from a challenge, but the challenges he faced had always been ones that were rooted in fairness. He believed that everyone deserved to be treated equally, regardless of their color, their background, or their circumstances. He had inherited his mother's strength, her resilience, but also her deep belief in the goodness of humanity. So, when Jordan had invited her to Maggie's Bistro that night, she had agreed without hesitation. It wasn't about the food or the fancy setting. It was about being with him, sharing in his success, and showing him that she believed in him. What she didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that this dinner, this seemingly ordinary evening, would soon be anything but ordinary. The stage was set. The restaurant, bustling with activity, full of guests laughing and sharing stories, was about to be thrust into a moment of confrontation. It was a place of comfort for some, a place of opportunity for others, but for Sarah, it was about to become the backdrop to one of the most profound tests of her life. A test of her faith, a test of her courage, a test of the very principles she had raised her children to believe in. Maggie's Bistro, once a symbol of everything her son had worked for, would soon become the epicenter of something that neither Sarah nor Jordan could have foreseen. And what happened next would change everything. It would test the fabric of their family, their community, and their beliefs in ways they had never imagined. For Sarah, it was just another day in a life defined by struggle and triumph. But for Jordan, it was about to become the moment when everything he had worked for, the love he had poured into his restaurant, the values he had lived by, would be called into question. The stakes had never been higher, and neither of them knew it yet. But the night was about to change the course of both their lives forever. Sarah's fingers gripped the wheels of her chair as she maneuvered her way through the door of Maggie's Bistro, the glistening brass handle cool under her touch. She had been here before, back when it was just a quiet, small establishment, before the glossy decor and upscale reputation. But this time felt different. There was a weight in the air, an unspoken tension that Sarah couldn't quite place. She moved slowly, but with purpose, her wheelchair gliding over the smooth marble floors. The buzz of conversation filled the room, warm light casting soft shadows over the tables where customers sat, enjoying their meals. It was a comfortable, upscale environment, a place she had heard Jordan talk about often. He had invited her here for dinner, proud of the business he had built. She smiled to herself, thinking of him in the back, working tirelessly to make the evening run smoothly. Behind the podium at the entrance stood Rebecca, the young white hostess who was greeting a woman in a sharp business suit. Sarah watched as Rebecca's face lit up in warmth, her voice rich with cheer. "Of course, Ms. Madison. We always have your favorite table ready. Let me walk you over myself." The woman, Ms. Madison, smiled back as Rebecca stepped out from behind the podium, guiding her to a prime table by the window. She pulled out the chair for her with practiced ease, placing the menu in front of her with both hands as she leaned in slightly. "And I'll send your usual Chardonnay right over." The interaction was seamless, polished. It was the kind of service you would expect in a high-end restaurant. A place where the customers felt seen, valued, special. And then Sarah was next. As she rolled toward the podium, Rebecca didn't notice her immediately, still engaged with Ms. Madison as if nothing else in the world mattered. But as soon as Rebecca turned toward Sarah, the change was instant. It was subtle, yet it cut through the air like a cold knife. The warm smile that had greeted Ms. Madison tightened into something less genuine. The warmth disappeared, replaced with something else. Rebecca's lips curled in a smile that wasn't a smile at all. It was an expression caught somewhere between mild irritation and amusement, like she was suppressing an inside joke. Her eyebrows raised just slightly, and her mouth pressed into a tight line, something between disinterest and disdain. Sarah, ever polite, met her gaze with a calm, warm nod. "Good evening. Table for two, please," she said, her voice steady, her heart unshaken. Rebecca didn't respond immediately. Instead, her eyes drifted over Sarah's appearance, taking in her natural hair, the modest blouse she wore, and the wheelchair that had become an uninvited companion to her life. Sarah could feel the weight of the moment, the silence that stretched too long. And then, as if speaking to a child, Rebecca leaned slightly over the podium, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, as though she were offering a condescending favor. "Are you lost?" Rebecca asked, her words slow and deliberate, as if Sarah had somehow stumbled into the wrong place by mistake. The sting of the question landed hard, not just in the words themselves, but in the tone, the mockery that accompanied it, the unspoken assumption that Sarah didn't belong here. Sarah's smile didn't waver, but inside, the anger began to rise. This wasn't just rudeness. It was something deeper, something cruel and calculated. But Sarah knew this game. She'd seen it before. Just as she was about to respond, the door swung open again, breaking the tension. A well-dressed white couple walked in, laughing softly as they entered the restaurant. Rebecca's entire demeanor shifted in an instant. The smirk vanished, her posture straightened, and her face broke into a wide, welcoming smile. "Welcome to Maggie's Bistro. You both look amazing tonight. Right this way, we've got a beautiful table available for you." Her voice was bright now, almost too cheerful, and she stepped out from behind the podium once again, eager to escort them toward a booth. The couple, completely unaware of the undercurrent of animosity that had just flowed through the room, sat down with ease, as Rebecca made them feel like royalty. She pulled out the woman's chair, exchanged small pleasantries, and even chatted as though they were old friends. The contrast between the way she treated the couple and the way she had treated Sarah couldn't have been starker. It was a clear message, unspoken but undeniable. Sarah, in her wheelchair, didn't fit the image Rebecca had in mind for who belonged in this space. As the couple settled in, Rebecca's attention returned to Sarah, who had not moved. The cold smile was back, but this time it was tinged with something worse, something more calculated. Rebecca let out a small sigh, as if Sarah had somehow inconvenienced her by simply existing. She tilted her head again, exaggerated pity crossing her features as she scanned Sarah's wheelchair. "Are you sure you can afford to eat here?" Rebecca's voice was low, almost too soft, but the mockery was clear in her words. It wasn't a question, it was an accusation, wrapped in a false concern. The words hung in the air, and Sarah felt every ounce of her dignity being chipped away. It wasn't just about the question, it was the implication behind it. It was the judgment that had no place. Sarah held her ground, her heart heavy, but her spirit unbroken. Just as she opened her mouth to respond, the door swung open again. Another group of white customers entered, laughing and chatting. Rebecca's eyes flickered, and the moment they did, her entire demeanor shifted. She straightened up, brightened, and greeted them as if nothing had ever been wrong. "Oh, hey, right this way. I've got the perfect table for you." They were seated immediately. No questions asked, no hesitation, no judgment. And Sarah? Sarah was still standing there, ignored, treated like she wasn't even visible in the room. She felt the sting of humiliation, but more than that, she felt the weight of an injustice that had been happening for far too long. She was used to this, used to the way people could treat her as less than, as invisible. But tonight, something was different. The feeling inside her was not one of shame, but of righteous anger. She wasn't going to let this moment define her. Not this time. A few minutes passed, and Sarah, who had remained silent, asked again, her voice calm but resolute. "Excuse me, can I please be seated?" Rebecca sighed dramatically, making sure Sarah could hear the full weight of her annoyance. "Fine. This way." She gestured toward the back of the restaurant, to the furthest corner by the restroom. "We don't want other customers feeling uncomfortable," Rebecca muttered under her breath, barely audible. The humiliation was complete. The message was clear. Sarah didn't belong here. But Sarah wasn't done. Not by a long shot. Have you ever been in a situation where someone's attitude shifted based on appearances? How did it make you feel? Share your experiences in the comments below, and if this moment is hitting home for you, don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Sarah felt the sting, but she also felt something else stirring inside her, a quiet resolve. Tonight, things were about to change. The air in the restaurant had thickened. The quiet hum of conversation around Sarah felt like a distant echo, muffled by the rage building up inside her. Each push of her wheels toward the farthest corner of the restaurant felt like a battle, as if the simple act of moving through this space that should have been welcoming, hospitable, was a challenge in itself. The whispers around her began to swell, soft voices reaching her ears like daggers. Sarah's eyes flicked to the side, where Rebecca, the hostess, was speaking quietly to a nearby server. The young woman's voice was low, but Sarah caught the unmistakable laughter that followed, a cruel mimicry of the way she moved through the restaurant. The laughter wasn't even subtle, it was open mockery, as if Sarah was a joke. The sting of it went deeper than any words could. She gripped the arms of her wheelchair tighter, fighting the urge to lash out. Instead, she clenched her fists and closed her eyes for just a moment, offering a silent prayer. "Lord, give me strength." But it didn't end there. The mocking continued. Another waiter, tall, with sharp features and a stiff posture, muttered something under his breath, loud enough for Sarah to hear. She should have gone to one of those places that's more her kind. The words hit like a blow. It wasn't the first time she'd heard something like that, but today, in this moment, it felt different. The hurt was raw, piercing. She'd been fighting for dignity her whole life. She had worked, prayed, loved, and lived with grace in the face of adversity. But this wasn't just a moment of prejudice. It was a public humiliation. A couple at a nearby table snickered, their eyes following her as she moved, whispering their judgment. Sarah's blood boiled, but she didn't let it show. She kept her face neutral, her posture proud. The pain was there, but it didn't define her. Not here. Not now. Her hands trembled as she continued to push the wheels, inching closer to her table. Her mind was racing, but there was one thing that kept her grounded, her faith. She had always relied on God's strength, on the belief that even in the darkest moments, she was never alone. Lord, give me strength. When Sarah finally reached the table, her muscles aching from the effort, she was met with yet another blow. A waiter, with a disgusted look on his face, approached her. He didn't greet her with the warmth she had seen given to others. His eyes flickered over her wheelchair, his expression hardening as if he couldn't mask his disdain. "Look," he said, his voice laced with a false casualness. "I just want to be real with you. This place has a dress code. Are you sure you want to be here?" The words hung in the air, thick and cruel. The implication was clear. Sarah didn't belong. Not just because of her wheelchair, but because of who she was. She wasn't the type of person who was supposed to enjoy the fine dining of Maggie's Bistro. Her chest tightened, the pain from the treatment still fresh. But something else flickered in her eyes, defiance. She wasn't going to let them strip her of her dignity. Not now. Not ever. The waiter's eyes darted to the side, likely expecting Sarah to apologize, to back down. But that's not what happened. At that moment, a voice, low and steady, interrupted the tension in the air. It was a voice that commanded attention, a voice that knew the power of standing up against injustice. Sarah didn't see who it was, but she felt the shift in the room. Heads turned, whispers silenced. The figure was a presence that couldn't be ignored. Someone powerful was witnessing this treatment. It wasn't just anyone in the room. Whoever they were watching, and they were ready to do something about it. The scene in the restaurant paused, the suspense hanging heavy in the air. Who was this mysterious figure? What would happen next? Would Sarah's silent strength be enough to change the tides? What would you do if someone treated you like this in a restaurant? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you're loving the story so far, don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more stories like this. The tension was rising, but Sarah knew one thing for sure. This was only the beginning of a journey that would test everything she believed in. And it was a journey she wasn't going to walk alone. The heavy wooden doors of Maggie's Bistro swung open, signaling the entrance of someone new. Jordan, dressed in a sharp suit, stepped inside, his eyes briefly scanning the room. His gaze flicked down to his phone as he checked the time, just another evening of managing his restaurant. The soft jazz playing in the background, the clinking of glasses, and the low murmur of conversation filled the air. Everything seemed normal, a typical evening in the bustling downtown bistro he had worked so hard to build. He made his way toward the kitchen, ready to check in on the staff, unaware of the storm quietly brewing in the front of the house. Meanwhile, Sarah sat at her table, her back straight, hands folded neatly in her lap. She clenched her napkin tightly, trying to steady her breath. She would not cry. She refused to. Not here. Not in front of them. The burning sensation in her throat felt like a lump that wouldn't go away. She could feel the sting of humiliation, the long, lingering stares from the surrounding tables, and the hushed whispers just loud enough to be heard. Each one was a reminder of what she had already endured in her life. She had lived with discrimination her whole life. From the moment she had lost the ability to walk after the accident, Sarah had learned to fight for her dignity. But today felt like something different. This wasn't the first time she had been treated like this. The restaurants that claimed to be full when she arrived. The cashiers who conveniently forgot to give her change back. The strangers who either looked down on her or, worse, didn't look at her at all. It had happened before, and it would likely happen again. But the hurt was always there, always fresh, always sharp. The clinking of silverware and the faint jazz music faded into the background as Sarah's eyes remained glued to the menu in front of her. She tried to focus on the words, but they blurred together. Her vision was hazy, her thoughts scattered. She needed to breathe, to steady herself. Her fingers trembled slightly as she turned the page of the menu, pretending that the world wasn't watching her, pretending that she wasn't feeling the weight of every single pair of eyes in the room. As if the universe had decided to pile on more pain, a young waitress walked past her table, balancing a tray of food. As she passed by, she muttered under her breath, just loud enough for Sarah to hear. She probably just wants attention. Sarah's body tensed. Her fingers twitched around the napkin in her lap, twisting it into tight knots, but she kept her face neutral. She'd been through this before. She knew better than to react. A few tables away, a well-dressed couple sneaked glances at her. The man scoffed, shaking his head in a dismissive gesture. People like her, always looking for a handout, he muttered. His date smirked, stirring her drink, clearly unfazed by the cruelty in his words. She should know better than to come somewhere like this. The sting of the words cut deeper than Sarah had expected. She had been prepared for the judgment, the glares, but somehow this was different. This felt sharper. The weight of it pressed against her chest. She lowered her gaze to the menu again, though she couldn't read a single word. Her mind was a blur of emotion, a whirlwind of shame and frustration. She swallowed hard, the lump in her throat refusing to go away. What would you do if you were in Sarah's shoes? How would you handle the situation? Let us know in the comments. And if you're hooked on this story, hit like and subscribe now for more. Just as Sarah thought she might be able to endure the silent humiliation in peace, the waiter returned with her glass of water. His approach was anything but kind. He didn't set the glass down gently, as one might expect in a fine restaurant. Instead, he slammed it onto the table with an audible thud. The force of the motion caused water to slosh over the rim, spilling onto the pristine white tablecloth. A nearby staff member couldn't help but snicker at the spectacle, clearly enjoying Sarah's discomfort. The waiter stood there for a moment, arms crossed, a smirk playing on his lips. "Oops," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "My bad." The room felt colder. The whispers that had already been swirling around Sarah grew louder, their cruel undertones unmistakable. One server leaned in from behind, speaking just loud enough for others to hear. "Why is she even here? She can't even walk properly." A table of young customers burst into quiet laughter, covering their mouths in an attempt to stifle the sound, but it only made it worse. The laughter echoed in Sarah's ears, and the pain cut deeper. She clenched her fists, gripping the edge of the table, steadying herself. She closed her eyes briefly, whispering a silent prayer. "Lord, give me the strength to endure this." But she wouldn't break. Not here. Not now. What do you think she should do next? Should she speak up or stay silent? Let us know in the comments below. And if you're enjoying this story, hit that subscribe button for more. In the kitchen, Jordan was wrapping up his conversation with the bartender when something caught his eye. The atmosphere in the restaurant felt off. Tension hung in the air. Whispers floated across the room, followed by occasional laughter. His gaze darted toward the dining area, searching for the source of the discomfort. And then he saw her. Sarah was still sitting at her table, her posture stiff, her shoulders hunched in a way that spoke volumes. She wasn't just uncomfortable, she was hurt. Deeply. The realization hit him like a freight train. His eyes narrowed as he watched a waiter walk past Sarah's table with a smirk, muttering just loud enough for Jordan to hear. "At least she won't be here long. They don't tip well anyway." Jordan froze. His heart pounded in his chest, a wave of disbelief washing over him. His own mother, his flesh and blood, was being mistreated right under his roof, in the very restaurant he owned. He felt a deep, bitter guilt settle in his chest. How could he have missed this? How could he not have seen what was happening? The very thought of Sarah being treated like this, of anyone being treated like this, was enough to ignite a fire inside him. This wasn't just about poor service. This wasn't just about a mistake or a misunderstanding. This was a clear injustice, and it was happening under his watch. What would you do if you overheard something like this? Would you step in or stay silent? Let us know in the comments below. The realization burned through Jordan, and he knew, without a doubt, that something had to change. Right now, before it was too late. The quiet hum of the bistro was shattered by the sound of Jordan's shoes clicking sharply against the polished marble floor. His footsteps were slow, deliberate, each one carrying him closer to the bar, closer to the storm that was about to unfold. Inside, his anger was like a wildfire, and it was threatening to break free at any moment. His hands clenched into fists, the knuckles turning white as he fought to contain the fury rising within him. His jaw was tight, his teeth grinding together, but he refused to let his emotions control him. Not yet. Not when everything was on the brink of shattering. The staff was gathered around the bar, laughing and joking among themselves, unaware of the approaching hurricane. Angela, the manager, stood at the center of it all, her laughter ringing out as she exchanged light-hearted banter with the servers. To her, this was just another night, a night that would soon take a turn she could never have predicted. Jordan's voice cut through the air, cold and sharp. Who trained you to treat customers like this? The room fell into a stunned silence. Every conversation ceased, and all eyes turned toward him, confusion evident in the expressions of the staff. None of them knew who he was yet. None of them realized that the man standing before them, eyes burning with righteous fury, was the owner of this establishment, the very person responsible for everything they took for granted. Angela was the first to react. She turned slowly, her eyebrow raising in mock curiosity. Her lips curled into a smirk, as if she were amused by his sudden outburst. "Sir, we have a certain image to maintain," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. Her tone was dismissive, as though she were addressing an annoyance, not a serious concern. Jordan's eyes darkened, his gaze unwavering as he took a step closer, his voice now dangerously calm. "And what image is that?" he asked, each word laced with a quiet venom that contrasted sharply with the calm of his delivery. Angela folded her arms across her chest, still unfazed, her posture one of complete arrogance. She didn't see the storm brewing behind Jordan's eyes. She didn't understand the gravity of what she was about to unleash with her next words. The kind that doesn't involve people like her. She gestured dismissively towards Sarah's table, her hand waving as though Sarah were an inconvenience rather than a paying guest in her own establishment. The words hit Sarah like a slap in the face. She was still sitting there, a silent witness to the scene unfolding. She had heard enough in her life to know what this kind of judgment felt like. But hearing it in her son's presence was different. The sting was sharper now, more personal. As her eyes met Jordan's, she could see the anger in his eyes, the fight in his posture. It was the same fierce protection she had seen in him all his life, and she knew, without a doubt, that this moment would change everything. She wanted to tell him to walk away. She wanted to shield him from this, to protect him from the fallout of confronting the very system that had betrayed them. But she couldn't. Not this time. Not when her dignity, and the dignity of everyone who had been forced to endure this kind of treatment, was at stake. "Jordan, let's just go." "It's not worth it," she said softly, her voice filled with the kind of quiet wisdom that only a mother could possess. She hoped that, somehow, her words would reach him, that he would listen and pull her away from this humiliation. But Jordan didn't move. He stood tall, unyielding, his gaze locked on Angela with a quiet intensity that made her shift uncomfortably. He wouldn't let this slide. Not this time. Not when he finally understood the depth of the injustice unfolding before him. Not when he realized that the people he had trusted to run his restaurant were complicit in this cruel, systemic behavior. He took another step toward Angela, his chest rising and falling with the weight of the moment. The silence that hung in the air was suffocating, the tension palpable. Every pair of eyes in the room was watching now, waiting to see what would happen next. Jordan wasn't just fighting for his mother's dignity anymore. He was fighting for the dignity of every person who had ever walked into this restaurant, hoping for a taste of something better, only to have their worth reduced to the color of their skin or their physical appearance. The room holds its breath. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she watched the confrontation unfold. She had been through so much, but seeing her son, her own flesh and blood, stand up for her in the face of such cruelty was a moment of reckoning. The anger she had buried deep inside her for so long, her frustration with a world that was constantly trying to make her feel small, began to rise to the surface. She had spent her entire life taking the high road, staying silent when people judged her, when they laughed at her, when they made her feel invisible. But Jordan wasn't going to stay silent anymore, and neither would she. It was time to stand up. Time to fight back. Angela's smirk faded, replaced by a glimmer of annoyance as Jordan took another step forward. She had underestimated him, thinking he was just another entitled son who didn't understand the complexities of running a restaurant, especially one as prestigious as Maggie's Bistro. But Jordan wasn't just any son. He was a man who had built this place from the ground up, and he wasn't about to let it be stained by the toxic attitudes of those who worked for him. "Do you really think this is acceptable?" he asked, his voice low but full of conviction. "You think it's acceptable to treat my mother like this? To treat anyone like this?" Angela's eyes narrowed, and she opened her mouth to respond, but the words caught in her throat. She knew there was no justifying her actions. Not now. Not with Jordan standing there, unwavering in his resolve. The room was still. Even the staff members who had once laughed, who had once turned a blind eye to the cruelty, were now silent, watching the man they had all overlooked for so long. They could feel the weight of his disappointment, the weight of his disillusionment, and they could no longer hide behind the facade of politeness. What would you do if you were in Jordan's shoes? Would you stand up for what's right, no matter the consequences? Let us know in the comments below, and if you're captivated by this story, hit like and subscribe for more. The stage was set for a battle of values, a showdown between righteousness and the arrogance of privilege. And it was clear there was no turning back. The tension in the room was electric, charged with anger, confusion, and the anticipation of what would come next. Jordan stood there, his fists clenched at his sides, his jaw tight. The fire inside him was too fierce to ignore, but he couldn't let it consume him. Not yet. With a steady exhale, he looked Angela square in the eyes. The words he was about to speak were not just a challenge. They were a declaration, a revelation that would change everything. "I own this place," he said, his voice cutting through the thick silence like a blade. The room felt utterly still. For a moment, it felt like time itself had paused. Then, slowly, a ripple of disbelief spread throughout the bistro. It was as though the air itself had shifted. Some customers exchanged furtive glances, eyes wide with curiosity, unsure whether they had heard correctly. A whisper ran through the crowd, like a passing breeze that grew stronger with each passing second. "I own this place," someone muttered, barely audible. A waiter near Angela, standing just a few feet away, scoffed, rolling his eyes as he muttered under his breath. Probably just another entitled customer trying to pull something. Jordan's declaration hung in the air, an undeniable challenge, but the reaction around him was a mixture of skepticism, doubt, and a touch of mocking disbelief. No one had expected this. The people in the room, both customers and staff, had seen Jordan as nothing more than a face in the crowd, a man who seemed out of place in the lavish world of the bistro. They had underestimated him. They had written him off. But now he was the one rewriting the rules. Sarah, who had been silently watching, felt her stomach twist with confusion. She hadn't expected him to say this. Her eyes flickered from Jordan to the staff, then back to her son. She had heard the way they spoke to him, dismissing him, belittling him. And now, here he was, making a bold declaration that defied everything they had assumed about him. Jordan, she began, her voice tentative, the edge of uncertainty creeping in. She knew her son. She trusted him. But even she couldn't fully grasp the weight of what he had just claimed. "What are you talking about?" Her words cut through the silence like a whisper of doubt, and for a moment, even Jordan hesitated. He could see the uncertainty in her eyes, the same doubt creeping into her heart that was now visible in the eyes of everyone around them. Was this really happening? Was he really ready to take this stand? Angela, sensing her own opportunity to discredit him, broke the silence with a laugh. A sharp, mocking sound that seemed to shake the very foundation of his words. "Yeah, sure you do," Angela scoffed, her expression contorted into one of pure sarcasm. She leaned against the counter, arms folded smugly as she studied Jordan. "If you own this place, then where's the proof?" The words hung in the air like a challenge, and Jordan could feel the weight of them. There was nothing to prove it, not in the conventional sense. He hadn't expected to be doubted. He hadn't expected to need proof. But he was determined to stand firm. He took another slow breath, pushing the doubt aside. The words were out there now, and there was no backing down. "Go on then," Angela taunted. "Call the real owner. Let's see what they have to say." The room held its breath. The staff was still, the customers whispered, the air thick with the taste of uncertainty. The challenge had been thrown, and now it was up to Jordan to respond. But instead of responding immediately, Jordan paused. His mind raced for a split second as the gravity of the situation hit him fully. He was a man who had spent so much of his life fighting for respect, fighting to be seen, not just for who he was, but for what he could accomplish. But now, standing in front of his staff, in front of his mother, in front of a room full of people who had written him off, the weight of the moment felt unbearable. Yet, it was in this exact moment that Jordan found his resolve. He had always known that he would be the one to challenge the system, the one to challenge the prejudices and the injustices that had plagued his world. He had fought too hard to back down now. He turned to Angela, his expression hardening. "You want proof," he said, his voice low and firm, but carrying the weight of everything he had worked for. "I'll give you proof, but I don't need to call anyone. I'll show you." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. With deliberate movements, he unlocked the screen, opened the contacts, and dialed a number that everyone in the room knew well. The number for the restaurant's legal team. The staff watched, some of them with a nervous energy, others with disdain, unsure what was happening. The hum of the room had died, and now there was nothing but the sound of Jordan's breath and the dialing of a phone. The call went through. Jordan held the phone up to his ear as the seconds ticked by. Angela's smirk faltered, her arms uncrossing as she watched him with a mix of disbelief and anticipation. "Hello," came the voice on the other end. "Mr. Walker, how can I help you?" Jordan didn't flinch. "Put me through to the owner of Maggie's Bistro." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. The staff in the room shifted uneasily. Sarah's eyes widened in confusion, but there was no turning back now. "Just a moment, Mr. Walker," the voice replied. Seconds stretched into what felt like an eternity. Angela's eyes flicked nervously between Jordan and the staff, clearly regretting the challenge she had thrown his way. And then, finally, the voice returned. "Mr. Walker," it said, "you're connected. The owner is on the line." Angela's face drained of color. Her cocky expression dissolved into one of pure shock. Jordan placed the phone on speaker. The entire restaurant was now listening. A hush fell over the room. "Mr. Walker," came the voice, clear and authoritative. "How can I help you today?" The room held its breath. Jordan looked directly at Angela, his eyes locked onto hers as he spoke one last, unshakable truth. "I'm the owner, and you've just been fired. What would you do in Jordan's position? Would you have the courage to stand up and take control? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you're hooked by this story, hit like and subscribe for more. This was the moment of reckoning. This was the point where everything changed. And Jordan was no longer just fighting for his mother's dignity. He was fighting for every person who had ever been silenced, marginalized, or pushed aside. The battle was no longer just his. It was for everyone. The tension in the restaurant had reached a breaking point. The silence was suffocating, thick enough to choke anyone who dared to speak. The staff, once full of confidence and disdain, now stood frozen, as if caught in the headlights of a reality they never saw coming. Customers glanced from one person to the next, unsure whether they were witnessing a scene from a movie or the unfolding of something much more significant. Jordan stood unmoving, his gaze locked on Angela. He didn't flinch, didn't raise his voice. He simply reached into the pocket of his jacket. The room held its breath, waiting for the next move, the next piece to fall into place. With a deliberate motion, Jordan pulled out a keyring. It was no ordinary keyring. Dangling from it was a polished silver emblem, the official logo of the restaurant. The symbol that belonged to Maggie's Bistro. The symbol of his family's hard work, dedication, and the legacy he had built. Without hesitation, Jordan tossed the keyring onto the counter, letting it land with a sharp clink. The sound echoed in the heavy silence that had settled over the room. Angela's smirk faltered immediately. For the first time, doubt crept into her eyes as she stared at the keyring. She picked it up slowly, turning it over in her hand, as if trying to process what she was seeing. She looked from the keyring to Jordan, then back again, her mind scrambling to make sense of the impossible reality unfolding before her. Before she could muster a response, the kitchen doors burst open. The head chef, a burly man covered in flour and sweat, rushed out, wiping his hands frantically on his apron. The moment his eyes landed on Jordan, his face drained of color. "Mr. Carter, I didn't know you were in today." The chef's voice trembled, his eyes wide with shock. The entire restaurant seemed to freeze in time. The staff, who had spent the last hour mocking and belittling Sarah, ignoring her pain, and treating her with the utmost disrespect, now looked like ghosts. Their faces were ashen, their mouths agape, as they realized the man standing before them was not just a customer. He was the very person they had belittled. The one person they had overlooked, assuming he was nothing more than a passerby. Angela's throat bobbed as she struggled to form words. She glanced from Jordan to the chef, then back to Jordan again, her confusion and panic mounting. "And Mr. Carter." Jordan's eyes were cold, icy, unforgiving. His voice, when it came, was laced with righteous fury, but it was controlled. Calm. There was no room for doubt in his words. "That's right. I'm Jordan Carter. I own this place." The words hit the air like a hammer striking an anvil. His gaze didn't waver as he spoke again, his voice carrying a weight that no one could ignore. "And you," he said, pointing a finger at Angela, "just treated my mother, the woman who raised me, with the same disdain you would treat a stray dog. Do you have any idea who you're messing with?" The room erupted into chaos. The staff scrambled, suddenly realizing the magnitude of their mistake. Excuses tumbled out of their mouths, stammers of panic as they tried to explain themselves, to justify their actions. But it was too late for that. Angela's face flushed crimson, her eyes wide with disbelief, the arrogance that had once defined her now replaced with the cold sweat of guilt and fear. I didn't know. I thought," she stammered, but Jordan cut her off, his voice louder, firmer. "No," he said, each word falling like a thunderclap. "You did know. You just didn't care." The staff around her looked more and more uncomfortable, shifting on their feet, clearly realizing that they had not only failed their customers, but they had also failed their boss. The one person who had trusted them to uphold the integrity of the restaurant was now standing before them, exposing their cruelty. But Jordan wasn't done. He turned to Sarah, who had been sitting quietly at the table, watching the entire scene unfold. She had been silent for so long, her gaze distant and lost. But now, as she met her son's eyes, she could see the fire in him, the fire that had always burned for justice, for fairness, for what was right. Jordan walked over to her, his hand gently resting on her shoulder, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she felt a sense of peace, a sense of knowing that everything would be okay. The chaos continued in the background, but for a moment, it was just the two of them, mother and son, standing united against a world that had tried to break them. And then Jordan turned back to the room, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "You don't treat people like this. Not under my roof." The manager, Angela, was now visibly shaking, her hands twitching as she tried to maintain some semblance of control. "Please, Mr. Carter," she begged, her voice desperate. "I'm sorry. This was a misunderstanding. It wasn't supposed to." Jordan shook his head. "Save it." He looked around the restaurant, his eyes piercing every corner. "I'm done with excuses. And I'm done with people like you running things in my restaurant. This place, this bistro, was built on respect, on community. If you can't live up to that, then you're gone." He turned to the rest of the staff, his gaze unwavering. "As for the rest of you, you have a choice. You can either stay and make this right, or you can leave. But understand this. No one gets away with disrespecting people like that. Not here. Not on my watch." The staff exchanged looks, their faces pale, their expressions filled with fear and shame. No one had ever seen Jordan like this. No one had ever seen him fight for what was right in this way. It was a side of him they hadn't known existed. A side that was determined, unyielding, and powerful. Angela, now completely defeated, dropped the keyring onto the counter. Her shoulders sagged, the weight of her actions crashing down on her. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Finally, Jordan turned back to Sarah, offering her a soft, almost apologetic smile. He gently pulled out the chair beside her and sat down. His hand rested over hers, and for a moment, the world around them faded. The restaurant was still in a state of shock, but Sarah, she saw her son in a new light. She had known he was capable of great things. But this was beyond anything she could have imagined. "Do you think Jordan made the right decision in confronting Angela and the staff? Do you believe in second chances, or should they face the consequences of their actions?" Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you've enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more. As the dust settled, one thing was clear. Jordan had not only fought for his mother, but he had also fought for something much bigger than himself. He had fought for what was right. And in doing so, he had changed everything. The air in the restaurant had finally stilled. The chaos of the past few minutes seemed to hang in the air, suspended in a way that no one could escape. The tension was palpable, thick enough to suffocate. But Jordan didn't flinch. He didn't back down. His resolve was ironclad. He turned to face Angela and the staff, and there was no hint of hesitation in his voice. "You're fired. All of you." The words cut through the room like a knife. It was a declaration of justice, uncompromising, final. Angela's face went ashen. Her mouth hung open in disbelief. "Wait, Jordan, please, I didn't know," she stammered, her voice trembling. But Jordan's response came faster than she could finish. His voice was like steel. "That's the problem. You don't treat people with kindness unless you know they have power." The staff members who had laughed and mocked Sarah earlier now stood frozen, their faces pale, their expressions full of regret. The arrogance they had once worn like armor now shattered into pieces, exposing raw guilt. Some of them broke down in tears, the weight of their actions crashing over them in a way that was far more painful than any punishment Jordan could have handed down. They realized, too late, that their thoughtless cruelty had consequences far beyond their immediate satisfaction. Jordan's gaze swept across the room, his eyes hard as stone. He wasn't here for revenge. He was here for something much bigger. He turned to face the remaining employees, the ones who had stayed silent, who had witnessed the cruelty but done nothing to stop it. "From today forward," he said, his voice commanding and resolute, "this restaurant will have new policies, anti-discrimination training, and diversity hiring." His words rang out, authoritative, and the staff listened, not with defiance, but with an understanding that their world was shifting. Jordan turned back to his mother, and for a moment, his demeanor softened. His gaze softened, and he took a slow breath, as if releasing the tension of the moment. "Mom," he said, his voice quieter now, more vulnerable, "I should have told you. I bought this place 2 years ago. For you." Sarah blinked, the weight of the revelation sinking in. "For me," she whispered, her heart swelling with emotion. Jordan nodded, his eyes filled with a quiet intensity. "To make sure no one like you is ever treated this way again." The truth hit Sarah like a wave, and for the first time in what felt like forever, her chest tightened, not from the pain of humiliation, but from something far more profound, the knowledge that her son had been fighting for her all along, even when she didn't know it. Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes, but she didn't speak. Instead, she reached out and took her son's hand, squeezing it gently, as if to hold on to this moment forever. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "God knew all along, didn't he?" Jordan's face softened, his own eyes glistening with emotion. He nodded slowly, his heart full of a realization he had only just fully grasped. "Yeah, Mom." He did. In that moment, the pain of the past, the sting of rejection, the weight of every look, every whispered word, seemed to fade away, replaced by something far more powerful: love, redemption, and the unshakable truth that justice had been served, not by anger or vengeance, but by love and understanding. As Jordan and Sarah made their way to the exit, the weight of everything that had just happened still hung in the air. But for the first time in a long time, Sarah felt lighter, like a burden had been lifted from her shoulders. She walked with her son, the man who had not only stood up for her, but had made a difference in the world around them. As they approached the door, a server appeared at their table with an envelope. She placed it gently on the table, not saying a word, and disappeared before Sarah or Jordan could react. Sarah, puzzled, picked up the envelope. It was plain, no return address, just a simple seal. She opened it carefully, as if afraid of what might lie inside. As she unfolded the note, her eyes grew wide. Inside was a large, anonymous donation. The money was substantial, enough to make anyone stop and take notice. But it wasn't the amount that took Sarah's breath away, it was the note that accompanied it. It read, "Thank you for standing up for what's right. The world needs more people like you." And at the bottom, simply signed, "A friend." For a moment, Sarah couldn't speak. She glanced at Jordan, who was staring at the note with equal disbelief. There were no words to describe the emotions swirling inside them. It was as if the universe had aligned, sending them a reminder that kindness, goodness, and standing up for what was right didn't just change one life, it sent ripples through the world. Jordan's hand gently squeezed his mother's, and for the first time, he smiled, a smile that reached all the way to his eyes. "This," he said softly, "this is bigger than we thought." Sarah nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness, but of hope. Hope that the world wasn't as cold as it sometimes seemed. That kindness still had a place. And sometimes, the most unexpected gifts came when you least expected them. The world outside the restaurant was calm, the evening air crisp and cool as Jordan and Sarah made their way down the street. They didn't speak at first. The weight of the past few hours hung over them like a quiet storm. But there was something else too, something that felt like a spark of hope, a quiet certainty that they had just witnessed a turning point, not only in their lives, but in the lives of everyone who had witnessed the events unfold. They reached the car, and Jordan opened the door for his mother. "You know, Jordan," she said softly, her voice filled with a warmth that had been absent for far too long, "I never knew how much you were doing for me. I never knew you were fighting for me." Jordan's eyes softened as he slid into the driver's seat, fastening his seatbelt. "I didn't want you to know. I wanted to protect you from the weight of it all. But I've realized something today." He turned the key in the ignition, the engine humming to life. "I wasn't just protecting you. I was protecting myself too. I didn't want to face what I knew was wrong. But now," he paused, glancing at his mother, his eyes filled with a quiet determination. "Now I know it's worth facing. And I'll keep facing it for you, for everyone who's ever been treated unfairly." Sarah smiled, the lines of worry around her eyes slowly fading away. She nodded slowly, her heart full. "I'm proud of you, Jordan. You're more than just my son. You're a man who stands up for what's right. And I pray others will see that too." As they drove into the night, the world outside seemed to glow with possibility. The road ahead wasn't always clear, but one thing was certain. Jordan and Sarah had made a choice. A choice to stand up for what was right, no matter the cost. And that choice had already begun to change everything. The next day, a restaurant transformed. The following morning, Jordan stood in the very restaurant where everything had unfolded just hours before. But today was different. As he stepped into the lobby, he noticed an immediate shift. The staff, who had once stood in fear, now looked to him with a mix of respect and nervous anticipation. Angela, the former manager, was gone. The staff members who had mocked Sarah were no longer there either. In their place were new faces, faces that reflected a commitment to respect, kindness, and diversity. The restaurant had undergone a transformation, not just in its staff, but in its heart. Jordan took a deep breath, standing at the front door. He wasn't just the owner of the place anymore. He was its protector, its advocate, and most importantly, he was the one who would ensure no one would ever have to feel the sting of cruelty like Sarah had. He walked up to the new manager, a kind-hearted woman named Carla, who had been hired that very morning. She smiled as she met his gaze. "Mr. Carter, everything's ready for the new training programs," she said, her voice full of enthusiasm. "We've already set up the first diversity workshop for the staff. We've scheduled regular sensitivity and anti-discrimination training too. We're committed to making sure this restaurant is a place where everyone feels welcome." Jordan nodded, a feeling of relief washing over him. "I'm proud of you all. Let's keep this momentum going. The world needs more people like you. And like my mom." Carla smiled softly. "We'll make sure of it." A new chapter begins. As weeks went by, the restaurant slowly became a beacon of change. News of the dramatic event spread, and soon, people from all walks of life were flocking to the establishment, not just for the food, but for the story that it told. A story of redemption, of standing up against prejudice, and of a son who would do anything to protect his mother. The anonymous donation Sarah had received continued to ripple through their lives. It wasn't just money, it was a symbol, a sign that when you stand for something bigger than yourself, you inspire others to do the same. The restaurant began to thrive, its reputation growing as customers returned, knowing that it was a place where respect was the rule, not the exception. And Sarah, who had once walked into that restaurant with her head down, now walked through its doors with her head held high. She no longer felt like an outsider, no longer felt small. She knew that she was part of something much larger than herself, a movement of kindness, of justice, and of love. One evening, as Sarah and Jordan sat at a corner table, they both reflected on the journey they had been through. The pain, the humiliation, the triumph. Everything had led them to this moment. "You know, Mom," Jordan said, as he watched the bustling restaurant around them, "I think we've started something bigger than just us." Sarah smiled softly, her heart full of gratitude. "I think we have, and I think it's only just beginning." As the evening sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the city, Jordan and Sarah looked out at the world with new eyes. They knew that they had made a difference, and they weren't done yet. They were just getting started. If this story inspired you, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss an inspiring moment like this. Share this story with those around you, because sometimes a single act of kindness can change the world. Comment your thoughts below and let us know how you would have responded in Jordan and Sarah's shoes. As the final credits rolled, Jordan and Sarah's story became more than just a memory. It became a legacy, a reminder that no matter where you come from, Friend, before you go, I'd love to share a message of love with you. Friend, Jesus loves you. He came to save you from your sins and hell. He died so that you can have a close personal relationship with God through him. Jesus came to give you life and purpose. Friend, the best friend to have is Jesus. It doesn't matter what you're struggling with. Jesus came to set you free. Accept Jesus today as your personal Lord and Savior. The Bible says in Romans 10 verse 9 that if you believe in your heart and confess with your mouth, you shall be saved. Say this prayer with your mouth and believe it in your heart by faith, and you're saved. Say, Lord Jesus, have mercy on me. I've sinned and come short of your glory. Please forgive me. I believe that you died on the cross of Calvary for me and rose on the third day. Save me, Lord Jesus. Give me the grace to live for you till the end. Don't let me fall away. Keep me in your will and sustain me in your grace, in Jesus' name. Amen. If you've done this, welcome, friend. You're now a member of the body of Christ. It doesn't end there, though. Develop a personal relationship with God by praying to Him and reading your Bible daily, and make conscious effort not to go back to your former life. Join a Bible-believing faith church close to you and become a part of the physical body of Christ.